My dad would often say that Spock was the outsider, and this is why I think a lot of people identify with Spock. My dad would say to me, look, Spock is the only, member of the core crew of the Enterprise who's from a different planet. Yes, there are people of different ethnicities, different races, different countries on the bridge. Spock is the only one from a different planet. And it paralleled his life being an outsider in Boston. His whole life was oriented towards how can I become a member of society at large? How can I get out of here? What can I contribute and offer the best that I have to offer as an artist? That is Spock right down the line. He said that is Spock's whole objective is quite simple. How do I give the best that I have to this group of people who are on this 5-year mission? Hello, my name is Adam Nimoy. I'm the author of a new memoir entitled The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. And this is Trek Untold.
Welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kavalowitz. And today's episode, we're taking a trip back down to some classic TOS stuff, but we're not really talking to necessarily someone who was directly in a Star Trek thing, although they were involved very much in it, and we're going to get into that. But today we're chatting with a member of the Star Trek original series legacy. Because today in our conversation, we're speaking with Adam Nimoy, the son of the late and great Leonard Nimoy. Adam just put out a new book called The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. And it is a book that really, you look at the title, you look at one thing, you're thinking you're going to get something, but you really get something completely different, and that's not at all a bad thing. The book chronicles the story of young Adam growing up with a famous Hollywood actor, although he was a struggling artist to begin with before he got that big Star Trek role. And the book shows what happens from point A to point B, and all the way up from being a child to where he is today in life. And that journey also includes Adam's personal struggles with dependency. So while the book is very much talking a lot about Star Trek and being the son of Leonard Nimoy, it's also very much a personal tale of addiction and recovery, and really quite an inspiring and motivating story to hear. This conversation is going to go in some really deep, unexpected places today, and I really give you guys a little bit of a content warning as well, just to make sure you understand what you're going to be getting yourselves into with this discussion here, because we will be talking about addiction, we'll be talking about recovery, obviously all those things that come with it, as well as the 12-step program that Adam has taken and continues to be a part of to get to where he is now in life. And I think one of the interesting parts about this interview, or maybe I should say fascinating, is we're going to really get to see a side of Leonard Nimoy that is not discussed much. Trekkies like us, we know Leonard Nimoy from his time in Star Trek. We've seen him in interviews, other TV shows, other films, in theater perhaps. Some of us have been lucky to see that. But we're really pulling back the curtain on who Leonard Nimoy was, the person, the artist, and the father. And Adam and Leonard did not have a great time growing up at all. For many, many decades, they butted heads. And the book discusses all the ins and outs of that and what it took for them to finally have a healthy relationship. And besides that, there will be, of course, some actual Star Trek talk, because Adam Nimoy did direct a few episodes of TNG and some other Trek here. So it won't be all serious stuff, but there's going to be a lot of serious stuff. So buckle up, get ready for what I think is a really, really interesting interview, and a really great one that I'm very proud to share with you guys today with the one and only Adam Nimoy. But before we start our chat with this week's guest, I want to remind you to please follow Trek Untold on social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find this show on all of those platforms simply by searching for Trek Untold. Make sure you subscribe to this show, whether that's on the audio platform of your choosing or on YouTube, where the video version of this show lives. And speaking of, make sure to check out our YouTube channel more frequently for episodes of our new mini show, Tales from Trek Untold, as well as other sci-fi goodies. And of course, don't forget to leave ratings, reviews, comments, and whatever you can do no matter what platform you're on to enjoy this podcast and show others that you're digging it too. If you want to support this show financially, please consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/trekuntold. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And joining us on the other side of the screen is the author of a new book titled The Most Human, a personal memoir, but also a look into life as Leonard Nimoy's son. It's a tale of humanity, of addiction, recovery, and acceptance with a side of Spock. The book's author is Adam Nimoy. Adam, welcome to Trek Untold.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much for having me.
It's exciting to have you here. To be honest, you're a guest who I wanted to have on the show for the longest time. And when I happened to find that you had a book coming out, I was like, well, I got to jump on that, man. So that's what I did here today. And I was just telling you actually before we started recording here, I finished the book last night ahead of this interview, and it is such a finely crafted book. I mean, I enjoy your writing style. I loved how interconnected all the different story parts were, the type of stories that you really just can't put down. And it's a seriously emotional ride through one heck of a life. So, Adam, I'd love to just kind of start and ask you, what made you decide to put the story on paper and share it with the world?
I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I think it's a successful story in terms of my relationship with my dad, which was very challenging and problematic during most of my life. And it's a story that I often share anonymously at the 12-step meetings that I still attend. I'm in recovery. I've been in recovery for 20 years. And there's a lot of people share a lot in the rooms about the problems that they have in their personal relationships, particularly with family members. And so a lot of times I share this story, again, without revealing who my father is. And it seems to resonate with people who have had to deal with a lot of challenging relationships in their lives, again, particularly within the family unit. And it just felt like it was something that I should be writing about. I should be exploring more deeply. I talk about it in the film that we made, the Spock documentary, For the Love of Spock. We touch on it quite a bit, actually, as one of the storylines there. But it just felt like, and I wanted to write something about my life and raising my kids and being in recovery, and I was kind of resisting going back to the relationship with my dad, but it just became more clear that it was something that I felt would resonate with people.
Yeah, because this isn't just the story of Adam Nimoy and Leonard Nimoy. It is the story of Adam Nimoy and that life as a whole, and that journey as a whole, and where we are today with you. And you mentioned For the Love of Spock, and I think a lot of Star Trek fans who might not have seen that documentary or might not know as much about you, they might be surprised to hear about that tumultuous upbringing that you had at the hands of your father, who, as you describe in the book, was kind of an absentee parent in a lot of ways during your formative years. And there is a lot of honestly really painful stuff in there. Speaking about your struggles with addiction, and as the subtitle of the book implies, reconciling with your dad. So what was it like for you to revisit all of these things? And again, we're going back to this being a book, putting those words into paper. What was it like for you to actually then have to not just think it and say it, but now do the action of writing it?
Well, it's always a very, it's kind of cathartic. It's a lot of processing. It's a way of kind of making sense of my life and the big picture of what happened to us. I mean, we had, it was kind of an extraordinary experience being in the family and being related to my dad, and the meteoric career that he had coming from such humble roots in Boston, Massachusetts, the son of Ukrainian immigrants. So I think many people have the same experience. When you write about this stuff and you're processing it helps you kind of see the big picture, and it's a very satisfying experience. It gives me a chance to really go back and see what the meaning of it all is about, and then and I've always wanted to write. So and then trying to craft a book that would kind of give the emphasis of what I was trying to say, which was really about the intergenerational relationships, in that I had trouble with my dad. How can I resolve that? How do I change the course of that? Which we managed to do, so that we were reunited in the last years of his life. And most importantly for me is, how do I kind of break the cycle so that I'm not kind of playing that out with my own kids? And that was really, and that is really what the book is about, is trying to figure out a way to, bridge the generational differences between my dad and myself, and myself and my own kids, because my dad was so far away from me in terms of his experience as a kid, that he grew up in the Depression. He grew up the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. They were from Ukraine, but they considered themselves Russian at the time. I grew up in sunny Southern California, and and we were pretty well to do, when I was 10 years old and Star Trek went on the air, things changed for us for the better. But I still struggled in my relationship with my dad. I was pretty much determined that I wanted to have a different relationship with my kids and repair my relationship with my dad. So the book was really, a great opportunity for me to kind of like examine how that all worked out and the struggle I had in making that work out. And again, I just think it's a tale that I think might hopefully resonate with other people.
Believe it or not, Adam, on this podcast, we actually talk a lot about generational trauma. And I know it's a Star Trek podcast and you might not think it fits, but we talk to a lot of folks who have had that kind of life. And then we've had a few guests on the show who did come from famous parents and they had to kind of work through this trauma later on in life as an adult to become the person that they are today. And a term that I hear a lot now is a lot of adults will be reparenting themselves, especially as they're bringing up new kids. And you talk a lot about that in the book. So I'd love if you can kind of tell our readers a little bit about essentially what it was like to have to reparent, because you have a foundation with your mother, but still, I mean, you didn't really quite know what it was like to have a father figure until much later on in your adult life.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I had to do a lot of work in recovery, a lot of work in therapy. I mean, I'm lucky that my mother was very loving and connected to me when I was a kid. And her parents, who moved to LA, were there for us, my sister and I. They were very loving, very warm, very affectionate. My dad had a lot more trouble with that kind of parenting. And that was the challenge of growing up with him. And it was very awkward when I was a kid because I just had trouble connecting to him. We just didn't know what to say to each other. And then as I grew older and I kind of fell into this addiction to marijuana and my dad fell deeper into his alcoholism, the awkwardness morphed into more conflict with him. So, I think it's like I had a good parent. So I wasn't just parenting myself. And it wasn't as traumatic as some people experience, frankly. I mean, I consider myself very lucky. But the fact is that particularly later on in life with my mother, I had to be more of a parent. We did switch roles with her because she did take good care of me when I was a kid. But then I needed to take care of her when when later in life for her, I needed to be more of a caretaker for her. And I think that was a role that I struggled with, quite frankly, for a while, accepting her for the type of life that she decided she wanted to lead the last years of her life. And this is explored very deeply in the book about some of my conflict with my mother. And it was, a part of my own recovery that I just had to finally figure out that I really I had to parent my mother, at that point in time, that she needed that kind of caretaking. And it was something that I ultimately finally just kind of accepted because of the fact that she had done so much to take care of me when I was younger. So, in terms of reparenting, I just, the real struggle for me, or the real kind of benefits of it all, is how do I take care of my kids? I was able to take care of myself. I had plenty of therapy. I had plenty of recovery. And I was able to work through a lot of the issues that I had with my parents, with my dad in particular. The issue for me in the book is, how do I parent my own children? That is the key. And sometimes it's a struggle, particularly when you have teenagers. It's really challenging. But I think as we moved along in the book, I think that I managed to circumnavigate that. I mean, this is the thing that, Matthew, for me, is like, it's a matter of modeling. My dad was not really a great parental figure when I was younger. But again, after we reconciled, he was the dad I needed him to be later on in life when I was suffering through some personal tragedy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's to give him the credit that's due. That by accepting him and letting go of some of the resentment I had about the way we had conflict and the way I was raised by him as a teenager and later, and letting go of all that and just not dealing with conflict with him, that it gave him the space to become the parent that I really needed him to be later in life.
Yeah, one of the themes in the book that we see brought up a lot too is the duality of your childhood, as you put it, which is where, you have this father whose work you're so proud of, but the actual human being who you live with is just so disinterested in you. And again, we were talking about a little while ago about finding meaning in what was going on there. So When you came up to that part, because it is such a big theme in this book, did you explore more of like why you felt that way, why you felt like that you could worship this man as this person, but he's completely different, and your reaction to him is completely different when he's in this other home setting?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Matthew. Thank you for bringing that issue up because the fact of the matter is, uh, look, in the memoir, I do spill some blood on the page. I do talk about some of the difficult things that happened with my dad. But I have to be careful in that, he is beloved by millions of fans all over the world. And the fact of the matter is, and I try to kind of like couch my feelings towards some of my conflicted feelings about him in the context of the fact that I was always proud of him and supported what he did, and that his success, particularly in TV and sci-fi, was something that he and I could bond over and really connect with each other about. I was always, I do that right away. This is not a book. It's not a tell-all. It is not Mommy Dearest. It is not Payback. It's what I think is. I try to be an honest and fair portrayal, and the way that I kind of couch my conflicted feelings with him is to, on the one hand, say repeatedly, I was always proud of the guy, and I always showed up for him willingly, so not even begrudgingly. I mean, I was glad to do it for him because I was myself amazed by what he had accomplished. And I am, and I love Spock just like all those millions of fans. And I also talk about the fact that a lot of the trouble I had with him early on, I have to give him a little bit of a pass on because his own parents were that way. He did not have really great modeling in terms of how to parent a child because I knew his parents very well. My grandparents, Max and Dora, could be very remote, very distant, very cool, very withholding, and they were with him. So there is that. The duality is there. I mean, I just loved what my dad accomplished. I was so proud of him. I was so I was so what's I can still feel the excitement I felt, Matthew, back then when Star Trek, was on the air. I was old enough at 10 years old to know exactly what was happening to us. And I am so grateful for that. I mean, I was waiting for the TV guide to come out with the first ad that said new series, Thursday night, Star Trek, the crew of the Enterprise exploring strange new worlds or whatever it was. I mean, I was constantly going to the market waiting for the new TV guide to come out with the first little ad with a picture of my father. So I still feel that excitement to this day.
That's an amazing. I wish I could go back in time and feel what that was like because that must have just been an amazing thing.
Yeah, it's just to feel it in real time. There's just nothing like it. I mean, for that matter, by the same token, I feel the same way about the Beatles. I mean, I was there. I was aware. It was happening in real time, and I had the same thing. I would be going to the market, in the neighborhood to buy stuff that was all Beatles related, and that started in '64. So in '66, when Star Trek came around, I was on it. I was looking, I was aware, I was, experiencing it. I am so grateful that I was that I was old enough to know what was happening.
Now, while a lot of this interview today is going to be focused a lot, Adam, on your relationship with your father, but the book itself, it's not just all about that. It's about your life story, your life journey. And a big part of that is about loss and dealing with loss. And whether that was about like your mother, as we mentioned, and the caretaker role that you took on later in life, your second wife, Martha, and eventually with your father. And, I doubt that dealing with loss ever gets easier. And you wrote about this in the book. So, if you don't mind giving us a little bit more insight, what did you learn about yourself in those moments of deep grief? Because you had some real, it's one thing for me to talk about it. Folks got to read the book and they'll know like it's some serious heavy stuff in there. What did you learn about yourself in those moments? And what can you share with us about that grief and finding the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's about grieving loss, really. And I was very fortunate that when I experienced personal loss with my second wife and my dad, both times I did go to an organization called Our House here in West LA, which puts together groups of people who have lost a similar family member. And it really gave me the opportunity to process with other people what they were going through and what grief is all about, what it's like, and just to feel it, Matthew. It's just a matter of like accepting it, feeling it, looking at it, writing about it, talking about it. I think was very beneficial to me to help understand what it is, what it's all about, how it's going to affect me, and to not fight it, and to I just felt I came out better for it. I mean, the grieving process is something that goes on for the rest of your life. It just changes over time, and I think I was very fortunate that I did reach out to get help to try to find a way to make some sense of it, and just to to give words and expression to what I was feeling at the time. It's very difficult. I mean, particularly when we were talking about, and I go into great detail about my second wife, Martha. It's shocking, it's traumatic, it's very challenging for anybody to have to go through. So for me, I'm very grateful that I had the benefit of being able to find some way to experience it in a way that most people don't get to. And with my dad, the interesting thing about the grieving process was the whole situation of making the film, because we made For the Love of Spock the year after I mean, I was making it with my dad. We were making this documentary about Spock together when he passed away. So continuing on with that project was a very interesting way of processing grief, because I'm living it. I'm looking at stuff. I'm looking at photos. I'm looking at Star Trek. I'm looking at news clippings. I'm looking at my dad in other roles. I'm working with editors. I'm working with the producers. We're interviewing people about my dad. I mean, that's a very unique situation to be able to work through and process the loss of Leonard Nimoy. And the other interesting thing on that note I want to mention is that when my dad died and we were working on the documentary about Spock, it became evident immediately that we had to expand that documentary to include not just the life of Spock, but the life of Leonard Nimoy. Because when people were writing me, and they were, and it was out on social media and in print media and in reviews, it was a lot about not just Spock, but also about Leonard Nimoy, the artist, the humanitarian, the Renaissance man, the creative soul that we lost on the planet. So, it became clear to me that we were going to really be looking deeply at my father's life, in general, and Spock in particular, but also other aspects of my father's life. But the point is that I was processing all this stuff through all these months after my dad had died in a way that most people don't really get to process the loss of a loved one.
So I think one of the big recurring themes through the book, Adam, is the work that you put in with your life to improve it to where you are today. And much of the book is framed around your recovery from substance addiction and the 12 steps that you learned through AA meetings. And so I'd love if you can kind of just give our audience a little bit of an example of that. And, we don't need to go into too much detail because folks are there. Y'all should be getting the book. But, this is an important part of your journey, of your recovery, and where you are today. So to kind of frame things for us, for folks who don't know, what are those 12 steps, and what's the way that you've been using them in your life, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, now where you are here today in 2024?
Well, okay. I can't go through the entire list of 12 steps.
Fair enough. That's a lot of steps.
Yeah, there's a lot of steps, or people have to look it up or go to a meeting. It is 12-step recovery. It's under the auspices of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are not a secret society. We do maintain our anonymity in the meetings. We don't share what other people have shared. We don't name names. But frankly, I don't think you have to be an addict to be in recovery. Everybody is recovering from something, some traumatic event in their life, whatever it is, whether it's the loss of a career or dysfunction in the family, or the loss of a family member, or divorce, or single parenting, or recovering from the experience of raising teenage children. I mean, they're just rules for life generally that worked for me, and they gave me some tools in which to deal with challenging situations, not the least of which was trying to figure out how to relate to my dad. Because here's the thing about my dad is that he's very you have to be willful and single-minded and really and determined to get on a train from Boston, Massachusetts with very little money and take a 3-day trip out to LA where you don't know anybody, to try to find your fame and fortune. It takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of chutzpah. It takes a lot of determination. And my dad is very headstrong about that. And this is a guy who came out here and supported himself. And then, and 7 years after he arrived here, he had a family of 4 to support. This is a guy who just hustled constantly with no financial support. And then all the while, trying to pursue this career in Hollywood. And you've got to really be tough. And he was tough. He was born and raised on the streets of Boston. And he was no joke, and when I had conflict with him, it could be devastating. It was very difficult to deal with conflict that I had with him. And it was only through, and to a lesser degree with dealing with conflict that I had with my ex-wife, with my mother, with my kids. But it was only through learning some of the tools of 12-step recovery that I was able to find a way to maneuver through all that. And a lot of it just has to do with patience, tolerance, and acceptance, and love and kindness. And that's just it. There's really a saying in recovery that you can either be right or you can be happy. But a lot of times you can't have both. And I just had to accept my dad and my mother, for that matter, for who they were. And acceptance doesn't mean approval necessarily. We often say, I also share this, we also often say the serenity prayer at the end of most of our 12-step meetings. God, grant me the serenity. We're looking for serenity in our lives to accept the things I cannot change, i.e. other people, i.e. my father. I'm never going to change my dad, never. To accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, me, and the wisdom to know the difference. And for me, that prayer set out at the end of almost every 12-step meeting is basically accept them, change me. God, please change me. And change my behavior and change my life and let me work on myself and let me keep the focus on myself. And that's what my recovery is really all about. And frankly, I thought I would just be in meetings for a couple of years. I'm your regular, Matthew, I'm your run-of-the-mill pothead. I was not an alcoholic and I was not a serious drug user. I'm just a pothead. And I figured I'd try out for a couple of years and then go back out and become a normie, and just drink and use occasionally or whatever. But I've been in recovery sober for 20 years now because I really enjoy the program and I'm always trying to learn about how to improve myself and how to live a life of serenity. And I need reminding and I need the tools and I love the community and I love people, listening to people who share about their own experience, strength, and hope in recovery because I learn from those experiences and I apply them to my own life. So that's it in a nutshell for me. That's what recovery is all about. That's how I believe it's because of recovery that I was able to reconnect to my dad to the point where we had really a close and loving relationship the last 7 years or so of his life. Thank God for that, because it would have just been a tragedy if we, had permanently parted without really any resolution.
Well, congrats on that sobriety. And really the book is a testament to that recovery process and the work that you put in. And spoiler alert for folks out there, obviously the subtitle of this book is about reconciliation. So Trekkies, Trekkers, you already know that the two gentlemen they did find a way to make things work. But if you want more details on that, you got to go get the book. But Adam, I do want to ask you a few things that weren't in the book. And one of those is, it's actually mentioned in the book, but not really in a great detail, is that you directed an episode of The Outer Limits. And that episode had your father starring in it. That was the episode I, Robot, which he was in the original version of. So I'd love to kind of hear what it was like to direct your dad on that show and to be part of that show.
Well, it was a pretty exciting experience, and it was an idea that my father had come up with actually when we were doing pretty well together. He wanted to do the work. I mean, it's just he loved to create work, and he thought it would be a good idea for me to approach the producers of the series and say, "Look, I can." My dad and I would like to remake this episode together. And it worked. The producers were very interested in doing that. I want to backtrack for a minute and say, though, and this is not in the book, and one of the many experiences that I had when I was younger, before Star Trek came on the air, was I was an avid TV watcher in the 1960s. And I loved The Outer Limits. And the episode I, Robot came on. And I didn't know that my dad was in it. We never knew when he was going to be. It was never clear to us when he was going to be in an episode of something. He did a lot of bit roles in TV before Star Trek came on the air. So I'm watching The Outer Limits, this fascinating story about a robot named Adam. And in that episode is my dad playing a newspaper reporter and befriends the robot. And I'm just like, and this happened repeatedly, Matthew. I would be watching TV and it's like, oh my God, there's Dad, which is just a cool, crazy experience to have. I just remember it so vividly when I watched that episode. And I love the episode. I love The Outer Limits. And I just thought it was, I jumped at the opportunity of working with my dad. So we came up with a concept. They hired a writer, and he and I flew up to Vancouver. Now it happened when in the middle of some other stuff that Dad was doing, and we managed to schedule him in. It was very difficult timing for him because he was under a lot of pressure to produce other work. I think he was actually producing a series at that time, but it was a pleasure working with him, and he gave me a lot of pointers. This is I think the third episode of TV I had directed, and I did a lot of work on it, and a lot of work with him during the pre-production process. And the thing that was interesting, I think, the most interesting thing I want to say about it is that while we were in production and we were shooting, there were a number of times where he would say to me, in very polite fashion, he'd say, "Why don't you just move the camera in to get my close-up? Why are you holding back with the camera? Just push in and get it now." And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. I said, well, I'm shooting a wide master and then I'm shooting and then we're going to come in for the close-ups. He says, yeah, but in this moment, this is a dramatic moment. You should push in with the camera. And I'm like, okay, wow, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it that way. And there were a couple of moments like that where he would take me aside and whisper something to me. And, and he was very polite about it. And, all directors get input from other people on the set, and we don't want the crew to think that the script supervisor gave me a note and now I'm going to give it to the actors, because you get great ideas from anywhere on the set. I wait a while before I say anything, there's an etiquette to how to do that. But my dad was very helpful to me in terms of my career, in terms of my craft. He was very informative. He had a lot of experience in front of and behind the camera. And, he'd say sometimes like, I think you want another angle on me for this. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, you should do it from here. Just get the camera. We're all lit for it. Just get him over here and let's just do it again. And I'm like, okay. I learned a lot. I was really grateful for that experience. This is one moment where we were kind of both of one mind and working really hard to create something special. And I think we accomplished that.
I mean, granted, I don't have the same quite experience that you had with like a father who is so well known, but I did a documentary a few years ago with my uncle, who is an artist, was an artist, passed away a few years ago also. And, it was kind of a similar thing, I guess, in some ways, where he'd be like, give me tips. And, he's a painter or whatever, but doesn't really know camera stuff, but he'd be giving me tips. And I'd be like, oh, that actually is a good idea. I'm partly humbled because I'm like, this guy knew it and I didn't even think of that. But it's still just like, it's wild to hear that. And again, just working with family members in that kind of way, it can be daunting, but it can also be very rewarding.
Well, with my dad, I have to say right away, I mean, there were a number of sources in which I learned the craft of directing because I come from a legal background and I didn't go to film school, but I've always been fascinated by story. That is the one key driving force that made me believe that I could be a good storyteller, but I needed the tools. I needed the technology. It was really my dad who really kind of headed me in that direction. And in fact, I was in an acting class with Jeff Corey, who was my dad's mentor, so that I could get a sense of what is going on with the actor's process. Because my dad was all about story. It was like, where you put the camera is really of no consequence. It takes secondary importance to what your story is about, what is the scene about. And there were key core things that my dad taught me that I used throughout my directing career, and they served me very well. I think they made me a much better director, a better storyteller, and a more collaborative director, particularly with acting talent. Because a lot of directors, I used to hear this complaint all the time on TV shows from the actors that directors don't talk to them, either because they don't know, what to say to an actor, or because they simply don't have time because we're moving so quickly in TV. But this is something that my dad really emphasized with me, which is like, and sometimes you don't want to give any direction to the actor. If you see a rehearsal and they're doing just fine without you, I mean, the best direction is to do nothing. and keep your mouth shut. But these are things I learned from my dad. It's like, what is the story about? What is the scene about? And then the rest will start to fall in place. Where to put the camera. All first-time directors are obsessed about where's the camera go, where's the camera go. And my dad used to say, the camera goes where the camera goes. The question is, what is the scene about? What do these people want from each other in the scene? Because that'll dictate where they're going to be in the scene, how they move in the scene. And once you figure out all that blocking and what the action is, he says it becomes pretty apparent where to put the camera. And that alone, I was so valuable to me. So I'm so grateful that we were able, that I had him as a resource to help me.
Hey everybody, we'll get right back to the interview in 1 second, but I wanted to remind you all to check out Trek Untold over at Patreon. Patreon is the best way to directly support creators of things you like through a monthly subscription of an amount that you can choose. Trek Untold has a few different tiers already with different benefits, ranging from early access to episodes, the ability to ask a future guest questions, exclusive merchandise, and other bonuses that I'd love to offer, but first I need to grow that Patreon community to do that. Trek Untold has been around since mid-2020 and has grown a ton since then, thanks to listeners and viewers like you. Through a platform like Patreon, you can help me keep improving the quality of each episode and keep bringing you new interviews with folks that make the Star Trek universe what it is. If this community can grow more over on Patreon, I can offer new perks like watch parties, exclusive Trek Untold episodes, being able to directly interact with guests, and other things, but in order to do that, I need to know my audience wants these things. The best way to tell me what you want is by supporting us on Patreon, so please, check us out at patreon.com/TrekUntold today and become a bigger part of the Trek Untold family. And now, back to the interview. Adam, I want to ask you something that's a little bit out of left field here. Recently on this podcast, we had Bonnie Moss, and we were talking a lot about your father, and not really just all Star Trek, but we were talking about his poetry and his photography and his music. And I asked her this, and I'd like to ask you this as well. I'm a little bit obsessed with the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, and I'm curious if you ever asked him about that, or if he ever talked about that song. Do you have any recollection of any stories related to that?
Oh, yeah, plenty.
I got to poke you more. What can you tell us about it?
Well,
was your dad a fan? I know I heard later in life he would regale audiences with a little taste of it, but when he recorded it, do you remember any of that? Do you remember how he was feeling about that album? And later in life, it became kind of like an internet meme, but in a good way.
Yeah. Look. Okay, I'm trying to think of the most politic way to say this. My sister and I listened to a lot of pop radio when we were kids. We had 8 transistor radios. We were listening to AM radio, and we were both very much into music and collecting 45 singles. So when my dad offered up the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, it was a little bit of a head scratching moment for us, I have to say. And we were actually in on the East Coast visiting my dad's brother in New Jersey when there was going to be a TV production where my dad was singing it, and they had kind of an animated figure of what Bilbo might look like dancing around near him. I've never seen it since, but my sister and I were just like, "Oh my God, no, this is not good." I don't know. That particular song. I don't. Why are you obsessed by it? What is the attraction? I'd love to know.
I'm not even sure myself. It's just the fact that you got Leonard Nimoy, who we all know as Spock, and here he is now singing a song about a fantasy novel that's, considered one of the greatest fantasy novels of all time. But still, it's just like this bizarre kind of meeting, and it's like this perfect point in time, this perfect point of nerddom and fandom, right? So That's why I'm just curious about it, because I feel like no one really knows what the deal is with that story, and I'm really just kind of trying to dig to feel what did Leonard actually feel about that song when he did it, and then years later when it feels like he finally maybe came to more of an acceptance of what it was.
Yeah, I don't, I couldn't comment on his personal feelings. We do make light of it in the documentary for the Love of Spock. There's a great moment in there, which I love, where the crew of the Enterprise have the same reaction that my sister and I do, which is a real head scratcher. Look, I gotta say that a lot of the recordings that my dad produced, I love them. I mean, some of them are really kitschy and like real head scratchers, like Bilbo Baggins, and he's got a couple of others like that on the many albums. I mean, he produced like 6 albums, I think, of material. And a lot of that stuff I actually really like, even even though he's not technically a great a great vocalist. I mean, he was phenomenal in the theater work he did, the musical theater. He was phenomenal,
Mm.
and I do love a lot of the albums. Bilbo Baggins for me is something I simply don't understand what motivated him to do it, because it's just so odd. It's just an odd piece of kitschy '60s, right up there with Golden Voices. I don't remember that Rhino Records put out, actors who think they can sing kind of thing, and I think it's on one of those compilations. And some of the stuff that Bill Shatner did, it was like, wait a minute, what?
Hmm.
What? Rocket Man? What is this? You have to. It's just I'm not sure what he was thinking. I'm not sure how he. I think even my dad was, chuckled at himself about doing it. The video they put together was very. I don't know. I can't. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure out a lot of things about my dad. And that's one of them.
I mean, I think from what I've heard of your dad, his voice is pretty amazing, and I wish I could have seen him in Fiddler because that sounds like that would have been a heck of a show to watch.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Phenomenal. And Camelot as well. And Oliver. I mean, he was terrific. But Fiddler was amazing. And we traveled around with him for a couple of months during the summer of '71 when he was in that production at different cities on the East Coast. And that I was just, it's hard for me to even describe the experience. I was so elated by it. It's so entertaining. Dad was so good. There were times when he was not even well. He was like, he had a cold and the show had to go on, and he was still outstanding. The crowds just loved him. The production was directed by Ben Shackman, was really well put together. The orchestra was fabulous. The cast was amazing. It was a great summer of our lives together. That's the weird conundrum of my dad and I, is that despite this incredible conflict we had periodically and regularly throughout our lives together, there are also these incredible memories.
Yeah.
When we were together and I was witnessing all this stuff going on, and I'm just so grateful to have had that experience.
I mean, that goes back to kind of the duality we were talking about earlier, and it got me thinking, and this is, again, the sci-fi nerdy lens, but that's what I'm here to do, Adam. It got me thinking about the character of Spock and how, like, you wrote in the book a quote from the 2015 obituary from the New Yorker, how, it was, I'm trying to find the quote now in my notes here, but his own sensibility, it seems safe to say, informed his character. And it got me thinking about the character, and I was like, here's this human being who has trouble with connections, just like Spock has. And he has a brother who no one ever knew about. The character of Spock never gets married, never has kids, devoted his life purely to work. And if I start to break it down in my head and look at it from or try to look at it from the perspective of Adam Nimoy, it's like, my goodness, not only is this guy just playing himself on TV, it's almost like he's playing a different version of himself that over time he did have to work through to get to the point where you and he could have that relationship. I'm not even sure if I have a proper question here in this case. It's just an observation I made about just how really close these two characters, how close Leonard Nimoy was and out to Spock. And it's just wild to me when I look at it from a kind of an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Leonard and Spock. There's no doubt about it. There, in terms of the kind of the distance, the difficulty in getting in touch with feelings. In terms of, my dad would often say that Spock was the outsider, and this is why I think a lot of people identify with Spock. Yeah. He was different. My dad would say to me, "Look, Spock is the only member of the core crew of the Enterprise who's from a different planet." Yeah. Yes, there are people of different ethnicities, different races, different countries on the bridge. Spock is the only one from a different planet, and that makes him very special as an outsider. And it paralleled his life being an outsider in Boston, because they lived in a bubble in the West End of Boston. It's an immigrant neighborhood. It's Italians, it's Irish, and it's Russian Jews, and he really felt like an outsider. And his whole life was oriented towards, how can I become a member of society at large? How can I get out of here? What can I contribute to the culture of my society? And that's when he said, the only way I'm going to do it is to get the hell out of here. I've got to physically move. And then he got the acting bug when he was very young, and it was either New York or LA. And for whatever reason, he got on a train and traveled across country for 3 days, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And that was his whole MO. That was his whole arc of his whole life is how can I how can I connect myself with society, the greater society, and offer the best that I have to offer as an artist. That is Spock right down the line. He said that is Spock's whole objective is quite simple. How do I give the best that I have to this group of people who are on this 5-year mission on the Starship Enterprise? How do I become a part of the whole? Even with the understanding that he has some special constraints emotionally, both Leonard and Spock, and that he is half Vulcan, and that they are a different type of being, and that he has control. And again, Dad would say it wasn't that Spock was not emotional or didn't have emotions, but they were in check all the time. He kept them under control. He kept them in check, and that was very much my dad. He liked it. I mean, it was hard to know what he was thinking at any given moment. It was hard to get him to say anything. And I say that in the book. There's a couple of moments where I'm like, hello, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Hello, anybody in there? And it was a lot like being with Spock. It was very difficult to get through to him sometimes. And we talk about the fact that my dad would often say it was difficult for him to get out of character when he was at home because the character is so constrained and so inward looking and introverted and distant and in control that it was very difficult for him to get in and out of character even when he was at home.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get this interview to be completely super duper heavy, but it's not easy when we're talking about this kind of topic here, and again, the topics that you go through in the book. But to kind of just pull it back for a second, it's some lighter stuff here. I do want to spend some time talking about your directorial debut in television, which was Star Trek: The Next Generation, and that was the episode Rascals, which is such a fun episode. I'm a big fan of that one. I think I'm a bigger fan of Rascals than I am Ballad of Bilbo Baggins. I'd love to hear a little bit about working on that episode, though, because again, this is the first time you're ever directing TV, and it's friggin' Star Trek, Adam. You got Star Trek Next Generation, and not only that, you got a cast of little kids to work with.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the warnings of a director is working with children and working with animals.
Is that what Hitchcock said?
Yeah. I mean, it can be challenging. My dad, warned me about that. It can be extra challenging. Well, the fact is, look, I had the connection to the production staff at Paramount for The Next Generation. My dad knew Rick Berman and the executive producers on the show. And one of my first jobs after I left the legal practice was to follow Nicholas Meyer around when he was directing Star Trek VI, and they used a lot of sound stages from The Next Generation. They were overlapped. And once we wrapped on Star Trek VI, my dad suggested to me that I go to Rick Berman and say, I'd like to find out more about what The Next Generation is about, how you produce and what directing is like on The Next Generation. And he was kind enough to invite me to start following directors around on that show. And I did for an entire season before he ever thought of giving me a job. And I got to know some of the directors on The Next Generation and what their process was. And I learned a lot. It was a real apprenticeship. That was kind of a precondition before Rick would even think about allowing me to, take on the responsibility of directing an episode. And even then, it was very challenging. I was not sure about everything I was doing. I went through the whole script with my dad in terms of how to break it down and what the scene would be about and what the show was about in general. But, it's very hard as a first-time director to, you can't, it's like one of those things that you just don't know until you're in it. What the challenges are, where the pitfalls are, when to hold back, when to defer, when to accommodate and when to, push the envelope a little bit and expand on your own creativity, how to interject it's a difficult dance. With the producers, with the writers, with the actors, with the crew, with the cinematographer. I mean, it's a big learning curve. Yeah. And there are a couple of times, there were some hard lessons for me to learn. There were definitely some hard and fast lessons I learned on The Next Generation. But I think it made me a better director in the long run. I mean, it gets to a point where when you have enough experience and you know what you're doing, that There's a real comfort level that comes with that, but it takes time. And as much studying as I did, and as much storytelling that I've always loved to do, and movie watching and TV watching, and all the UCLA extension classes and private acting class with Jeff Corey, and Leonard Nimoy School of Directing, and directing students, and shooting little films. I mean, all that was great. And The Outer Limits was it, that came immediately after Star
Yeah.
Trek. The Outer Limits is where I really felt like I'm finally really getting into my own as a director and getting more comfortable with the process and more confident in the work I was doing and more competent in the work I was doing. The Next Generation was really kind of like, it's like getting on a fast moving train, Matthew.
You were
That's
thrown into
what
the
it's
deep
all
end
about.
really quick.
Yeah, I mean, you got to learn real fast and get there real fast, because those guys, I'm not even sure which season I came on. It was 3 or 4, or maybe 4 or 5.
6, actually, I believe.
6. Okay, six
Yeah.
seasons of Next Generation. Those people know what they're doing pretty much. And it's a real smooth, well-oiled, fast-moving train. And they don't suffer fools lightly. So they were very courteous and kind to me, but I was clearly, in a lot of instances, green, behind the ears and just trying to find my footing. So it's very challenging to come aboard a show like that that's been around for a long time and have seen a lot of people come and go, and they really know what they're doing. There's not much I can really do as a director that's going to be insightful for them or new for them. They know their characters very well. It's the guest cast, and we had a large guest cast on Rascals, and they were all kids.
Yeah.
So it's very challenging, but it was. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity. Yes, there was a nepotistic aspect to that in terms of my relationship to my dad. That is true. But as my daughter and my nephew often say, and they're both in the industry. Hello, are you coming in? No, my cat.
It's a good luck sign of this podcast.
What's that?
That's a good luck sign when a cat or a dog walks into the room when we're doing this
really?
podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
That's always a good sign.
Good. My daughter and my nephew, who are both in the business, and they both, I think their connections through my dad were helpful to them, but they both say the same thing. If you don't have the goods, then you're not going to survive. I mean, there is in Hollywood, and my dad has confirmed this with me many times. There are people who fail upwards in Hollywood. It does happen. People who don't have skill, talent, or ability, or are just simply not very nice people. You find them in moving up the the food chain. There's no doubt about that. But more often than not, in my experience, is that if you don't have the goods, if you don't have the ability, you're just not going to survive, no matter who you are.
I mean, truthfully, like the nepotism angle wasn't really even something I was thinking about, because really, when I look at these 2 episodes, I'm like, because you also did Timescape, which I want to talk to you about right now too. Rascals had its own set of challenges, but you did it, and then it was an amazing episode. And likewise, Timescape, you're talking about how this is a cast who knows each other and everything else, but Timescape is a very technical episode as far as directing goes, and that just feels like, again, a whole new set of challenges. And here's this green director coming in, and you're doing it, and it's a heck of an episode. So, again, kind of same thing. What do you remember about working on that one? And obviously, you can't really direct the crew because they know what they're doing already, but you still have to like kind of guide them to make sure you get the shots you need to give to the special effects people on this very special effects heavy episode.
Well, on that, I mean, the key to that is just to learn and defer. I mean, they had a really good special effects team and visual effects team. So those guys knew what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing. So it's just a matter of really trying to stay humble and keep my mouth shut and keep my ears open and learn as much as I can and find out from them what they needed. I mean, this is very common, excuse me, on sets when we need the help of professionals who are handling these kind of things. I'm very deferential. Whatever you need, tell me what you need and how to do it, and I'm happy to give it to them. So there's very little input I would have necessarily in those situations. It's just a really big learning curve. Now, it happens that Timescape was an episode that occurred near the end of that 6th season. And when you're at the end of a season on any TV shows, and this is the old model. I mean, I'm not sure that many shows follow this anymore. It's like a 22, 24 episode season. That's a killer season. That just wreaks havoc on you. On you physically, on you emotionally, on your personal life, on your relationships. It's really difficult. And when you get near the end of the season, people are tired. And when people get tired, things get rough. And that happened occasionally, and I had to be much more careful. And I learned a lot. I mean, it's really good when whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger is the truth. And I had to learn a lot about how to handle very difficult situations, a lot of touch and go situations on that episode because the crew is tired, and you can't push that hard, and you got to be careful not to make too many mistakes because where they were tolerant with me earlier on in the season when I was a new director, it wasn't so much the case when we came back at the end of the season. And I'm still kind of a green director finding my way. So much more challenging episode for me and a real eye opener in terms of how rough it can really be on set. And it wasn't like a complete anomaly. I mean, that situation occurred in my directing career periodically throughout my career, where I would get a tired crew, or there would be some dysfunction on the set, or a troublesome cast, or people who are not getting along, or producers who were not easy to work with. I mean, you always have these challenges. There's always some challenge like that on every show. So it was really good eye opener and learning experience. And then there's some shows that I've been on where everybody's collaborating, everybody's on the same page, everybody's working to help you, everybody's got the same energy, everybody's excited. And you're just cranking out a great show and you have a great time. That does happen too.
So, Adam, there's one thing that I admittedly wish there was a little bit more of in the book, and that would be touching more on the infamous, or famous, perhaps we'll call it, the Shatner and Nimoy feud. And I don't really know if even calling it a feud is the right way to describe it, but I know that they had a lot of ups and downs in their relationship. So, do you have any insight on where that stemmed from, and what was it like between them towards the end of your father's life?
Well, it's a really good question, and I really appreciate you asking that. Spock, okay, cool it. Okay, I'm so sorry about that. I just have to make light of these things, man. I mean, sometimes it's just,
It's like very Monty Python-esque right now. This interview just turned into like a Monty Python animation with a paper Spock popping up on the bottom of the screen.
I know. I mean, I just love that. It's just, I can't help it. Occasionally I just have to do it. That's what my dad would do.
Yeah, that's what Bonnie Moss said he would respond as well, same way.
That's what my dad would do. Look, the situation with Bill and Leonard, we talk about this a little bit in For the Love of Spock, and there's a competition between two guys, both ambitious guys with egos. It is the captain's show. Bill Shatner is the star of the show. And we have a supporting character, or a co-starring character who's very popular in the show. And so it creates a little tension, a little competition. There's also tension and competition with Gene Roddenberry, and Leonard, as I say, is a very headstrong kind of guy. And all these guys are knocking heads, but I think they were really in it for, the objective was always the same, which was to create a good show and to give their best. And I would often say to my dad, you had a lot of conflict with Bill on the show. There were some disagreements. I mean, I will add that later in life, they became very close friends. There was a period of time where they were, really close with each other. And, I really appreciated that they found their own reconciliation for a while. It didn't last as long as I think it should have, but they were able to find each other. But on the show, look, I just think that it made the show better. They were all fighting for their character, for what was best for the show and for themselves as well. These are three strong-willed individuals, and there's going to be conflict. I've seen it on other shows, and I often like to say that it was, I read Jeff Emmerich's book, and I'm a big fan of the Beatles, and it was during the making of the White Album when things got rough and tumble for the Fab Four, when they were having their own interpersonal relationships that were in conflict. The fact of the matter is, the White Album is a masterpiece, pure and simple, despite all of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's not too far of a stretch to say the same may be true of what happened on Star Trek. And I would ask my dad, how is it that if you had so much conflict with Gene and with Bill in particular, that you guys are so great on camera? You're just amazing on camera. The chemistry is amazing. And my dad would say simply, we were professionals. That was his answer. We were professionals. And when the camera was rolling, we knew exactly what we needed to do. And so it's no secret about the competition and some of the conflict, but the show certainly didn't suffer because of it.
Absolutely, very true. Now, I interviewed Bonnie Moss on this podcast, as we mentioned not too long ago, and we discussed a little bit about what she knew about the final days of Leonard's life. And one of the things that we talked about was the final tweet that he wrote, which I want to read right now to folks who might not be familiar with it. The final tweet that was posted was, "A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. Live long and prosper." And this was essentially a small piece of a poem he'd written decades earlier. And my question about that is, when your father tweeted that, how aware do you think he was of his own mortality in that moment? Like, was he curating what he felt was going to be like the perfect send off, knowing that these would be his last words to the public?
Well, I don't know for sure because I wasn't there, wasn't talking to him about it, but he was aware of his own mortality, that's for sure. So it wouldn't surprise me if he thought this is going to be the last tweet. That is quite possible. I mean, I talk about in the book the fact that it was in November, December. We lost him in 2015, so it was in 2014 when he was talking about the fact that he had been offered another role in one of the Star Trek films and for the following spring, and he turned it down because he didn't think he was going to be around in the following spring.
Yeah.
And then he recanted that because he was having a bad day. But the fact of the matter was, when the following spring came around, that's when he passed away. So I think he knew. He had COPD. He knew. He was struggling, and that was a surprise to me. Also, it discussed in more detail in the book about how all that went down. Okay, if this is good luck, hello, this is the good luck.
Hello. What's that cat's name?
Allie, she's the one who came in the room. Hello, you're on a podcast, Allie. Yeah, I mean, I talk about in the book the fact that he had COPD, and COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, completely due to the fact that he smoked cigarettes for 30 years, and he was running out of breath. And it's amazing that he dodged the bullet and never had lung cancer. That is, I mean, it's hard to understand how that could happen. But he was really lucky in that respect. But it finally caught up with him. So I think the tweet is something that he was it may have been a conscious decision on his part to make it his last tweet.
I mean, it's been many years since Leonard Nimoy has passed away. And, so much of your life is intertwined with your father's. And in ways, like, again, right now you're still telling his story to the masses, letting all of us Trekkies know about him and other parts of him through the documentary that you did. So, to still have so much of your life tied to this man, does this make the loss feel any greater? Does it fill the hole anymore? And what's it like to still continue to give so much of your life to this person?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, Matthew, because I'm not sure how much more I will be giving of that. I mean, this may be the last chapter for me. I don't know. But what you have to understand from my perspective, and it's a really good question, it's not just his life. It's my story too. The story of Leonard and Star Trek is, in a small way, also my story because I was there. I witnessed it. I experienced it, and it is a part of my life. So, it's not just the Leonard Nimoy story. It is my story. Look, I'm a writer. I love writing. I want to continue writing. There may be more to tell about my relationship with my dad. I don't know. I may want to work in another medium to tell that story. I don't know. My feeling is in terms of writing about it. In terms of in publishing, this might be the last chapter for that. The first and last chapter. Not really the first because I have published other short stories in another book based on my relationship with him. I mean, it's the defining relationship of my life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is my story, and working through my relationship with my dad is kind of like a defining moment in my life. So it's kind of hard for me to separate the two. But I have other interests though, and other things that I want to be pursuing, and I will continue to do that. But it's still, and I don't. It's hard for me sometimes to separate my own experience from what I experienced with my dad. So yeah, that, a part of it is just, like we were saying about the documentary, it wasn't just a story about Mr. Spock. It's the story about Mr. Spock and Leonard Nimoy, because the two are so closely bound to one another. And this is something that my dad carried with him his whole life. I mean, this is the whole trauma that we went through with I Am Not Spock, which he wrote in 1975. Not saying that he didn't like Spock or he wanted to distance himself from Spock, but people kept confusing him with, him with Spock. And he's just trying to clear up the record. I'm really not Spock. I'm Leonard Nimoy, an actor who played a character. But the fact of the matter is Spock is so much Leonard that they're really inseparable. And he finally came to grips with that when he corrected the record with his last autobiography, I Am Spock. So, it's and which he was very proud of, and something that he's kind of accepted as just a part of his persona. And that, in a little bit of a way, is really what about, writing about my life. It's just inseparable from my father's story.
Looking back on this journey that you went through with your dad from childhood to where you are today as a full-grown adult with kids of your own, what's the greatest gift that he taught you that you in turn then gave to your own kids?
What's the greatest gift? Well, I think it's just about the priority of family, really. And that's where my dad was at the end. He did an interview. He said, I'm all about family now. Before it was career and his work life. That was his priority. And that was pretty clear, to my sister and myself, that he was just not present as a parent because he was working so hard to keep his career going and maintain his career. For me, I had just different priorities, and it was really, I came upon it earlier in life for a bunch of different reasons, where I just felt like family's going to be more of a priority to me from the get-go. Something that my dad, decided on later in his life and was committed to. He was very committed to the family in the later years of his life, very dedicated to the family, very important to him to have the family all around him. Friday night Shabbat dinners together with the family, or holidays or birthdays, traveling together with the family, helping other family, helping all of us, make it in the industry, being like a godfather and hearing, our stories about our experiences in the industry. That is a lesson that I brought home, and it was something I knew early on in my own life, but it was really kind of reinforced when he figured out what was really going to be important for him, that family really does come first in the end. And I think I've felt that way all my life, but it was really, really significantly reconfirmed when my dad made that own choice for himself.
Well, as we kind of wrap this interview up here, we have spent the hour essentially talking mostly about Leonard Nimoy, but I just feel like I'm obligated to say this too to you, Adam, is, you have lived a heck of a journey, you have lived a heck of a life, and you have done the work. You have put in the work and you have come out on top. So I want to congratulate you on your sobriety and just who you are today, because, you are who you are because of what happened to you and you did the work to come out on top. So to kind of wrap things up here, I think I want to ask you, I've asked other people about, what they want their legacies to be. And we've talked all about your father's legacy. But let's say your kids stumble on this, and both your kids who are both doing amazing in their lives now as well. Let's say they find this interview 20, 30 years from now and they watch it. What would you want your legacy to be?
My legacy?
Legacy of Adam Nimoy. What's your legacy?
Here's the legacy, because this question came up in conversation with my dad, actually. My legacy: live in the moment. Nothing else really matters. Just to be in the moment, Matthew. Just to be in the here and now. Just to enjoy my life to the fullest right now. Be in the moment. This question was actually asked in a conversation over at a dinner table about, what do you want your legacy to be? My dad was there. And I said, my legacy, I'm just trying to live in the moment. That's all I really care about. And my dad said, good answer.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap this one up then. So folks out there, you want to check out the book. It is The Most Human: Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. The author is the man we've been chatting with for the last hour, Mr. Adam Nimoy. Again, thank you so much for sharing your journey with everybody out there. And for the bravery, the honesty in that. It's just an amazing read. I hope everybody picks it up. And for you, Adam, again, likewise, like I've said, congratulations on everything you've accomplished with your life, because it is your life. So thank you very much. And I think you deserve this one, but live long and prosper. Thank you so much.
Matthew, you too. Live long and prosper. Thank you so much.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Thank you for checking it out. Don't forget to follow us on social media, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Trek Untold, and subscribe wherever you are listening to or watching on. And that includes the audio versions on whatever platforms that might be, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@TrekUntold. If you'd like to support this show financially, please consider visiting patreon.com/trekuntold to become a member of this show. And along with getting access to all sorts of wonderful perks, you'll also know that you're helping out this show continue to thrive, survive, and make new content all the time. I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold. Thanks for watching. And until next time, always remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars, is powered by the Rageworks Podcast Network and affiliated with Nerd News Today.